everyone. This is Dr. Nicole Quinn, and I'm here with Dr. Jason Goldsmith, co host of the Immunology Podcast. Welcome to the Lab Coats in Life podcast, where we help scientists thrive. The Lab Coats in Life podcast is brought to you by STEMCELL Technologies, a global biotechnology company supporting life sciences research and fostering communication and collaboration in science. If you enjoy the Lab Coats in Life podcast, rate us and leave a review. You can also suggest ideas or recommend guests for new episodes. Today, we have Dr. Cesar de la Fuente from the University of Pennsylvania on the podcast to talk about his experience in using artificial intelligence to support scientific research. Dr. de la Fuente's lab consists of a transdisciplinary team that brings together computer scientists, engineers, chemists, peptide scientists, biologists, microbiologists, and experts from various other disciplines. Their collective mission is to use the power of machines to accelerate discoveries in biology and medicine. But before we get to that, the STEMCELL Technologies Mentorship Resources area features various free downloadable toolkits, including a collection of templates and spreadsheets to help you organize your lab space. To download these resources, visit www.stemcell.com/labtemplates or find more practical resources at www.stemcell.com/labcoatsinlife.
Welcome to Lab Coats in Life, Cesar. Could you introduce yourself briefly and give us a little bit of info on your research and how you developed an interest in AI?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to share this time with you guys. Yeah, basically, my lab focuses on using the power of machines to accelerate discoveries in biology and medicine, and in particular, we're focused on the big problem of antibiotic resistance, and so we're trying to um, leverage AI to accelerate our ability to discover new antibiotics to treat bacterial infections. And actually, I studied machine learning during my undergrad, in addition to mathematics and other things as my part of my major. Um, but later on in my career, I was actually doing my PhD at University of British Columbia, and towards the end of my PhD in microbiology and immunology, I sort of became dissatisfied by our inability to actually program biology. And I had this epiphany that perhaps machine learning and AI would help us get there, would help us actually um, program biology in a predictable way. And that's sort of how I came back to AI. I was, lucky that I was recruited later on for my postdoc at MIT, which, at the time was a mecca for, or the mecca for AI research. And so that's that's sort of how I reconnected with machine learning, with AI, and how later on, of course, I applied it to the area of antibiotic discovery and infectious diseases and biology in general. And the rest is history.
Thank you for that great overview. So, what we want to do here is help our listeners really understand what AI tools are accessible to them in their day-to-day lives as scientists and how they might be able to apply that to just their work, not necessarily even their research questions, but how they can go about all of their jobs as a scientist, whether that's teaching or writing, or I'm not sure we can get into it, but maybe we can start by, because I'm sure your lab has like very specific tools and models you're building and training on your own, but maybe we can start by giving a more broad overview of what artificial intelligence is available to people right now that in the scientific community that they might want to learn about or try.
I mean, I think increasingly, of course, AI is increasingly pervasive in our society, and science is no exception. Nowadays you can use AI to, edit papers, manuscripts, to improve your writing. It's sort of like a colleague, or something that you can bounce ideas off of. So I think that can be extremely productive, extremely beneficial in the scientific pursuit. And in my lab more specifically, we use AI coupled with a lot of experimental data. Actually, we generate a lot of good standardized data in my lab that then we use to train our AI models. And I think it's also important to highlight that, right? I think in science, and in scientific discovery, um, particularly, you actually really you you need really good data to actually train their models, right? Um, Without that, a lot of these machine learning models are just can be quite not very effective or not very useful, actually. But anyway, there are also people working on developing AI scientists, which are essentially models that they help generate new hypotheses based on your data. They delineate protocols for the kinds of experiments that it recommends that you conduct. So we are moving towards a future where I think, I think it's already happening, but I think AI will be very much a companion to human scientists. And I can give you examples of how we do that in my own lab, where we combine sort of everything that the machine tells us to do with what us humans also recommend. And we actually it's already happening. It's already a very tight collaboration where we take advantage of you know the sort of the power of processing data and finding hidden patterns of machines with human intelligence and human um, ingenuity. So it's already happening.
So for AI, I mean, I divide it into two parts, right? There's, hey, can I use AI to help me write my email or make a task list for the day or all those fun things. So I want to start there versus like I can use AI to, model protein folding for me. So on a day-to-day basis, you have, I would call it Microsoft Office like capacities with Copilot, or you can use anything else to do the same thing. But that kind of general realm, where are you seeing that take off with the student population outside of the notorious, now I can use it on my exams when I probably shouldn't be, but more in like the productive day-to-day environment? Are you seeing AI help students get more organized or summarize papers or things like that are kind of like the day-to-day grind work?
I think so. I mean, I think in some ways it is helping us be more productive, or at least not have to spend as much time as we used to on mundane sort of daily tasks like replying to emails, or summarizing a paperwork, or or editing editing scientific writing. So it's already sort of, I would say it's already sort of helping reduce the amount of time that we spend on mundane sort of boring tasks that we have to do every single day. I've seen, in general with students, the way I've approached this in my own lab is, this is a great new technology in terms of more like the chatbots, right? And let's try to use it. And so we're conducting an experiment right now in my lab where we're training our own large language model uh, to learn so that it can learn how we all write. And in my lab, my whole team, and it can learn the type of research that we do. So then it can help us, it can assist us as we write new things and we feed new information into the model. So I decided to run that experiment. So far, people are really liking interacting with the De La Fuente Lab AI model. And I liken this a little bit to I remember being a student and calculators were introduced. And I recall there was a lot of reticence at first. There was a lot of, people got a little bit nervous. I remember a lot of my teachers still said, "Oh, it's best if you actually do all these calculations manually." But of course, eventually calculators just took over, right? It makes sense. They reduce the amount of time that we spend doing things that, they are important. I think it is important to learn how to do calculations, but at the end of the day, we only have 24 hours in the day, and if we can accelerate some of these things, that can be beneficial because we can devote our time to thinking about other things or reading, coming up with new ideas. So I would say, to answer your question, I would say AI is already really kind of helping in the day to day. But of course, when I also communicate with my lab, I also tell them, the caveats, right? I tell them it's a powerful technology, but you guys have to use it correctly, right? So do not just ask it to generate new text for you. Only use it to edit your existing text. I think learning how to write is an incredibly useful skill, regardless of what you do, because it can actually extrapolate to how you communicate orally as well, and other things that are very helpful in any context, in any job, in your daily life. So just like any transformational technology, it can be used for good, it can be used for bad, and so it's important to also know its limitations, right? And to complement it with our own human understanding, human knowledge, human creativity. Um, but I think if used properly and in sort of this tight collaboration, I think it can be beneficial.
I had one really quick follow up. How do you guys afford the compute as an academic lab for a large language model? Or are you guys able to do it because it's much more scaled down and narrow as opposed to, scouring all of humanity's writings that you get from like, ChatGPT 4.0 or what have you? Because I can imagine that can get really gnarly if you needed the level of compute that Microsoft or whoever's bringing to bear. That's spendy.
Yeah, no, it's a pretty bespoke system, and we have our own compute cluster with you know substantial compute, so we can do it. But no, it's a great question. Obviously, we don't have all the information in the world, but we're doing it at a smaller scale and sort of with the information that we have here.
I want to get back to that companion or using AI kind of to augment your own thoughts and knowledge versus like provide you with thoughts and knowledge. And I like your calculator analogy. I know as a mother of a teenager, I'm often helping with math, with math, like grade 10 math. And there's a propensity for my daughter to reach for her calculator to do very simple calculations. Or I'm like, no, 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 those you need to be able to do that quickly and in your mind, like but there's a threshold where okay, now it's complicated enough that you can use the calculator. And I think it's the same thing with writing. Like you have to have a basic um, writing skill level, and then you can use AI. I often describe it as like a glorified thesaurus, or like, I use it to, can you reword this for me? Or can you like change the tone of this? Can you simplify this a little bit? But I do worry about people losing those innate skills. And I know in grad school for me, a lot of it was teaching communication. I mean, I ultimately went into communication as a job, but it was like, how do you communicate your science and how well you can communicate your science? So I think it's very important to make sure that we still have those skills and build those skills, and we use AI as kind of a friend along the way, and maybe uh, um, an assistant along the way. So I wanted you offered to provide some examples of projects that you're using artificial intelligence for in your lab, and I'd love to hear some of that. Yeah, if you have anything really interesting to share.
Absolutely. And yeah, I couldn't agree more with the companionship that
Mhm.
AI is sort of becoming in our daily lives. So in terms of things that we do in my lab, um, like I mentioned, we focus a lot of our efforts on antibiotic discovery. This is a big problem, right? We have increasingly more and more people dying from untreatable infections, and super bacteria that are resistant to a lot of the antibiotics that we have available today. They are associated with about 5 million deaths per year in the world today. That number is projected to double by 2050 unless we come up with new antibiotics. So it's a really, really big problem, right? So one of the things that we're doing is we've developed AI models that can mine biology to try to find hidden antibiotic molecules. And this was an idea that we had a number of years ago, where we we just realized that we could conceptualize all of biology as a bunch of code, right? A bunch of letters, like the code that we use to communicate with each other through the alphabet. Biology, if you think about it, in its sort of basic principles, it's just a bunch of letters, right? Like DNA is composed of nucleotides, which is a code of 4 letters. Proteins are composed of amino acids, which is a code of 20 letters. And if you think of it that way, then you can start, begin to conceptualize how you can develop algorithms that can mine all of that code and then make sense of it and identify molecules that had not been described before that you could use, in our case, to kill bacteria, as antibiotics, but you can also try to find other types of molecules, right, with other functions. And this is, by the way, very different from the traditional paradigm of identifying new antibiotics, which is a tremendously physical process where scientists literally go around nature and they take soil samples or water samples and they try to purify active compounds that might be present in that very complex organic matter, right? So you can imagine that process is very painstaking. It can take many, many years to identify new compounds. So in sort of implementing this digital era of discovery, we came up with a number of algorithms. And so I'll give you an example of a particular hypothetical project where we can mine a number of genomes, for example, and at the end of the digital exploration with AI, the algorithm gives us a ranked list of molecules that it predicts will be good antibiotics that it found on those particular genomes. So that's when then we have a meeting in my lab with human scientists, where we actually look at the list that the computer generated, and we make decisions as to which of those molecules to try to synthesize using chemistry and to further characterize in the lab. And so it's really sort of a tight collaboration between the recommendation made by the machine in terms of, okay, this is the ranked order of like what I think will be the greatest molecules that will kill bacteria more effectively, with then the biochemists, the chemists in my lab getting together and saying, well, I actually disagree on this one because it has a lot of hydrophobic amino acids, which means it's likely to aggregate. It's going to be really difficult to synthesize. So let's not go for that one. Let's instead go for these other ones. And so it's really a conversation between the recommendations that the machine provides to us, and then also the recommendations made by the human scientists in my lab. And the other thing I'll say is that everybody's is commenting on the fact that AI is going to replace us. I don't think that's going to be the case because we still need human scientists to actually generate the data, experimental data that we later on feed onto our AI models. So I would argue that at least for the foreseeable future, for the next 10, 15, even 20 years, we are going to need humans in the loop, very much in the loop, and not only in the loop, but actually generating the data that is sort of the gold that we have to feed into these algorithms to actually be useful and to be reliable.
So for the antibiotic part, are you using I guess, the code or the rules that you see in bacterial biology as the rule set, or are you also applying fundamental chemistry rule sets so that it doesn't go and try to make like a quadruple carbon bond or some other, I guess you could do a quadruple carbon. You get my point. Like, you can't go make a quintuple carbon bond and
Yeah.
break something or make some, insane macrolide that is out of, a Picasso painting.
Yeah, of course. I mean, everything is based on our training sets, right? So I'll give you the example of one of our latest AI models, which is called Apex. It's really state of the art at the moment. Uh, I think the really cool thing about Apex is that you give it an amino acid sequence, so a chain of letters, and it directly predicts the antibiotic function of that amino acid sequence. So it's a sequence to function prediction model. It doesn't take into account structure in this case, but the way we trained Apex is that we basically generated a huge data set experimentally of a number of peptide molecules or small proteins and their respective antimicrobial activity scores, which the great thing in infectious diseases is that we have this great assay that we call the MIC assay, or stands for minimal inhibitory concentration, which is a great assay because then it allows you to measure objectively the antibiotic function of any given molecule. So at the end of the day, basically we have a bunch of molecules with the respective amino acid sequences, and then this MIC score, and that's what we fed Apex to be able to train it. And And Apex can scour through many genomes and proteomes and identify um, patterns, amino acid patterns that look like what it learned from the training set. I think one of the critical aspects there was that we fed it really highly robust, standardized data, and that's something that was a conscious decision that we made, you know, over 6 years ago, when I had this idea that for AI to be successful in biology and in chemistry and in microbiology, we needed really good data sets, right? And so basically we decided to create this big data set in my lab. And this is, by the way, still an unfunded project. I've been talking to NIH for a long time and NSF to sort of encourage them to start funding data set generation projects, because um, everything is sort of hypothesis driven projects, right? That these agencies fund. But I would make the argument very strongly that for AI to be successful, we need to start having big efforts to generate good data, right? Particularly if you think of complex areas like biology, right, where sort of there are many variables involved, and the better the data that you have, the more robust your models are going to be. So anyway, and by the way, a little bit of historical context with Apex. We were not sure how much data we were going to need in order to successfully train Apex, and this was a whole adventure that now, retrospectively, is kind of funny, but in the moment, I think it portrays the excitement of scientific discovery and the sort of the uncertainty that oftentimes happens, right? So I had calculated that it would take us about 2.5 years of generating data in order to have enough data to train Apex. Um, but that turned out not to be true. And after 2.5 years, we tried to train Apex and it didn't work. It was not sort of reliable enough, and so I had to go back to the drawing board and recheck my calculations to make sure I was not off by, let's say, an order of magnitude. In which case, this would have been a multi-decade project, long project, instead of a multi-year long project. Um, and I also had to convince my team, right, to continue sort of building this amazing in-house data set, standardized data set, right? And despite not being correct in the first estimation, and in the end, it took about 3.5 years to generate enough data to be able to train Apex. But um, it was difficult, right? Like when you're really trying to do something for the first time and push the boundaries of knowledge, oftentimes things don't work as expected. And I think it's important to also highlight these failures, or so-called perceived failures in science, and the scientific discovery process. But after 3.5 years or so, it worked. So, and thankfully, right, because otherwise my team would have killed me, perhaps. But it worked, and Apex is a big success now.
When you're making your own AI, are you custom, like for Apex, are you using a custom generative AI script, or are you pulling some open source as your base to train? Because I think that's when we talk about making our companions, there's probably a pretty different barrier of entry to train something off open source versus write your own AI code.
We do. So in terms of the AI models that we use in the lab,
Yeah.
it's probably a combination between those two things. So for some of our models, for antibiotic discovery, and now, by the way, we're getting more and more into, within the realm of peptide design, we're getting into immunology, cancer. We have collaborations in many of those other fields. So it's really a combination. Depending on the project, sometimes we have to come up with you know, generate our new code. Sometimes we can use off the shelf. It really depends. It really depends on the project and the collaborators that we have and the people involved in the lab, and all a number of different variables.
First, I want to get back to the fear that I don't think just scientists have. I mean, as a communicator and somebody who works in marketing, runs social media, all of these things, like everyone is just worried about what AI is going to mean for their world, like their job and their sustainability within their job. And there's just no getting around the fact that some things, some skills that we've all taken many years to learn and perfect are going to be replaced by AI, and AI can do it just as well. My my husband is a graphic designer, and his skill set is logo design, and he's like, that's probably not going to be as important. The AI can do some beautiful logo work, but there is still an element of creativity and curiosity and taste and style and all of those things that goes into, I think, all of these things. So I like the story that you've told about how there's still maybe a different perspective scientists have, but that curiosity and discovery piece is still really there. And then there's the other thread I wanted to pull on there is the fact that this work is unfunded at this point because it's a different approach to science rather than being hypothesis driven. You need the data first, and then you can start asking questions of the data. So um, that's a really fascinating way to think about it. Um, as always, I have to find the question in my comments, and, and so I'm not really sure where this is going, but I'm yeah, I guess I'm just interested in the guidance you would provide scientists who are a little nervous about AI, who haven't used it, whether it's in their day-to-day work or actually to support their research. Where would you say they start? How would you kind of ease that unease that people have?
I mean, I think starting with the chatbots, right, like ChatGPT and other foundation models, is a great start. It's sort of like talking to a colleague, right? You can, I think one thing that I found helpful is bouncing ideas off of each other. What do you think of this, right? Because most ideas that we have as scientists are bad ideas, right? Most things don't work, and so you really need to have a continuous flux of ideas coming and going, and then try a couple of them, and most of them won't work. But I think in that respect, it has been quite helpful. I mean, obviously helping with drafting emails, uh, really a lot of these mundane daily tasks. I think that's also helpful. But within the scientific process, also trying to find citations from the literature, it could be helpful there. But always double check, right? Make sure the citation is actually real. And so I always you can cross check with PubMed, right, to make sure, or Google Scholar to make sure that particular paper actually exists. I would encourage people to also read the paper. I think one of the this has nothing to do with AI, but one of the things that every scientist can do and most scientists do not do is read the literature. And I always try to convey this to my team members because and my trainees, because if you learn almost everything that has been done before, it's just a lot easier to come up with new ideas because then you know the space of possibilities of what has not been done. And I remember being a PhD student, and during, for the first 2 years or so of grad school, actually at UBC in Vancouver, every time I had an idea that I thought was novel, I remember checking the literature and finding out that somebody else had done it, and that happened for a while. That happened, so it's a process of, okay, you need to know what has been done before, and then once you reach, a couple of years of reading the literature as part of a habit, then you finally start having new ideas that people haven't had before. And I still remember that moment when I had an idea. I went to check in the literature expecting to find that somebody else had done it, and finally that was not the case, and so that was a proud moment. And it's exciting, right? It's exciting to really reach that point, um, where you can start asking questions that, or at least having ideas that people have not had before, and that's really when you start pushing the boundaries of science and of knowledge. And I think that's, in my opinion, there's nothing more exciting than that.
I want to build off of your comments uh, around teaching students to read the literature, and I'm wondering, again, back to AI. Now I know it hallucinates like crazy and it literally makes up papers, and I was just at a conference called the Web Summit in downtown Vancouver, and every single session was about AI, and the big caution, like, it felt like the theme of that entire conference was authenticity. It was make sure that humans use AI in a way that helps with efficiency and kind of taking out some of the mundane tasks, but that we continue to make sure that everything around how we communicate and what we put out into the world is authentically human. And so I'm curious about, first of all, the guidance that you give to students around, yes, keep up with the literature. What role can AI have in that? But then also, do you ever use like language models or AI to do things like write papers or grant applications? And then how would you advise, like, what are the strengths and weaknesses that you would advise students on that?
Yeah, whenever I have mentoring sessions and people ask me, what is the number one or the top of the list of things that we can do to be successful? I always tell them it is something that you all can do easily. You all know how to do. You could do it, but most of you will not do it, and that is reading the literature.
Mhm.
You all know how to write. You all know how to read. So you can all do it. You can all turn that into a habit, and but most of you will not actually do it, and consistently, right? That is that is a piece of advice to sort of translate or convey to them. um, eh, Going back to human authenticity, I think as AI continues to every layer of society, I think we will value more and more something that is human made. I do foresee a future where, for example, for a piece of art, uh, like a painting or a drawing, we will probably pay more for something um, that has been made by humans uh, versus AI. I think one of the problems that I see with AI in that respect is that everything will become more homogeneous, perhaps. Um, and so I think we will increasingly value more and more something that is made or created or imagined by the human brain. In terms of LLMs, I do use LLMs sometimes to edit text. I think it can be quite helpful, especially when you've been working on something for a while. You run out of ideas and you can't even see it in front of you anymore because you can't see you don't actually see the writing. And then it becomes really helpful to again ask the model, okay, can you sort of edit this or rewrite it in a way that it's more polished or whatever. So I think for that it can be incredibly helpful, and I encourage my team to use it for that, to for them to generate the text first, to write the text themselves, because I think, like I mentioned earlier, I think writing is an incredibly helpful skill to have. But then use the models to help you polish it, right? And as a result, now in my lab we have a lot of people that are international, whose first language is not English. That includes me as well. So, but we have many other people, and so the first drafts that I get are a lot better than they used to be back in the day, right? And I think that in general that can be very beneficial to science, right? So it's just like any huge technology that has transformed our world. It's all about how we use it. It's all about knowing what are the limitations, hallucinations, of course, Nicole being one of them,
Mhm.
and making up citations, making up papers, and then knowing those limitations, and then trying to overcome them, and always triple checking everything. But yeah, those are some ways that we're using these technologies in my lab, and I think many other labs are doing the same. And in the future, we're probably going to be seeing a lot more integration between these AI systems and the humans in the loop, or I would say the humans run the show still, and the AIs are in the loop.
Have you used deep research functions from ChatGPT at all to avoid some of the hallucinations for scientific papers? I've started to dabble with that, noticed that it's much better. I don't know if you've gotten to play with that offering or other deep research ones, which seem to be really focused on proper citation as their training set.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. It's a lot better. You have to wait some minutes to get the output, but overall, in my experience, that reduces the hallucination rate. They're still not perfect, of course, but I would agree with that.
I feel like this episode, I don't want it to be time stamped. AI is moving so fast. And we're recording now in May of 2025, and probably by like the fall of 2025, everything like there's going to be some other development in AI and a lot of the things that we're talking about may not even actually feel relevant anymore. So I want to kind of put this in a big picture perspective. Like, what do you think the long-term future is for scientists, and remembering that lab coats in life is really about helping scientists with their career journey and with like figuring out how they're going to navigate the next steps in their career, whether that is as a researcher or some other area of science that complements researchers and helps move science forward. So, do you have any sort of big picture thoughts on what or guidance on what you would tell a scientist who's in training right now or who's trying to think of their next step in research and how AI might play into that?
I would say that there is no more exciting time to be in science as now, because you have all the human ingenuity and creativity that humans have, and then you pair that with AI systems that just accelerate processes. So I think there is an incredibly exciting time to be a scientist. Um, Something that I've imagined for a long time now, is a future where in a scientific lab, um, humans are left to do a lot of the thinking, and with improvements in automation and all this huge acceleration of scientific discovery and acceleration of scientific processes through machine learning and AI, I think we might soon reach a point where a lot of the repetitive tasks and all that and will be done by machines, and humans, like I mentioned, will be left to do the thinking, which I think is the best thing that we can do, right? We have the human brain, which is obviously, I think, the best invention that came out of the evolutionary process. Um, and then the human brain came up with the scientific method, which is the best framework that we have to available to us to understand the world. And so if we get to just apply the scientific method and think and come up with new hypotheses and interact and collaborate with the machines, I foresee a future where in a research lab we'll have this amazing collaboration between humans and machines, and I think humans will perhaps be more stimulated intellectually, because they will be able to devote a lot of their time to thinking. And then as a result of that, probably they won't need to be in the lab for so many hours. They might just come into the lab for a couple hours, read some papers, um, interact with other humans, interact with the machines, and then go home. And so maybe the future of science is a future where humans think for 3 4 hours a day, and then they go home and they do other things, because the rest of the tasks will be done by machines. And if you think, obviously it's an optimistic view of the future of science, but I tend to be an optimistic person. So I think that would be a great, I would like that.
I have a follow-up to that. First of all, that I would love that because, bench work was not my favorite part of scientific training, and the sort of connecting ideas and thinking and learning was much more interesting to me. Do you think it's gonna speed up scientific progress? And do you also, sort of the same question, think that it's going to reduce the time that students need to spend in training um, before they get out into the world and get their jobs or do more? Do you think we're still gonna have 5, 6, 7-year PhDs?
I don't think so. I think this will accelerate a lot of that. I think a PhD, in general, 4 years. I think it's in general probably sufficient. Of course, it depends on the scope of the work, the field. There's a lot of variability, but in the work that we do, which is what I know. Um, but I do think it will accelerate a lot of things. I do still think that probably the best thing that I got out of my PhD was learning how to apply the scientific method in a
Mhm.
professional way, right? As a professional scientist. And that's something that you can take away all throughout your life personally as well, because it allows you to sort of go around the world applying this method, that is evidence based, and then making decisions in your daily life that are based on evidence and sort of empirical evidence. And I think that's something that is a lesson that it takes a bit of time to learn. It takes. I do think it is a multi-year effort. I also think that doing a PhD is. I thought when I did it that it was an amazing privilege, right? You get to spend several years of your life thinking, um, and you have sort of free time to read and be intellectually stimulated without having many other major pressures around you. At least that was my experience. And at the end of the day, you get this PhD degree, which is the most prestigious degree in our society. And I don't know, I just thought it was a privilege to be able to spend some of my life learning. Obviously I'm still learning, and that's why I'm a scientist. It's probably the number one thing that I love about this job, is that I get to learn every single day, and I wouldn't want to have it any other way. I I love solving intellectual puzzles, and I love learning, and I love being challenged, and I love failing in the scientific sense of the word, where of course most experiments don't work, but I always tell my trainees that even if things don't work, we're still learning, right? Maybe the hypothesis, we tested our hypothesis, it's not what we thought. Let's continue evolving the thinking and moving forward.
I was just thinking of another advantage of AI is that you could use it as one of those. They're using it for therapy now, and you could use a pep
Uh,
talk AI.
yeah, there are apps now in different facilities, and little robots as well that have proven to be, and little mascots, robotic mascots that have proven to be extremely helpful for people that might be alone, or they might need reminders to take certain pills in their daily life. And I think those things are already here to stay. And I think they fill a very important niche, I think, and gap that we previously didn't have. We relied on humans before, and those systems are imperfect because humans are not always available because they have other things to do. Nurses, for example, and so now having some of these robots and some of these systems, I think that can be. I think that's already a big thing that is happening, and I would for sure say that that's a beneficial thing, or a beneficial repercussion or application of AI.
Mhm. I think we just kind of keep circling around the same theme, which is the theme that everyone's speaking around with AI. Like I said, I was at this web summit, and this just kept coming up. Was all of the things that we do exceptionally and uniquely as a human, like you were saying, the scientific method, failing, just thinking and learning, and I think those things probably. We still need the time and the space to do that, and what we should be using AI for is to give us more time and space to do that. And I think when it comes back to, my previous question around, is this gonna make scientists get out of the lab sooner or get out of training sooner and out into their jobs? I agree with you that there's a fundamental minimum amount of time that it takes for a scientist to really train themselves to, or get the training to think like a scientist and be able to apply the scientific method rigorously and understand how that is sort of the entire culture of science. But if they can spend more time doing that and less time doing the repetitive lab tasks, then that's great. Uh, yeah. So, Jason, any final questions for Cesar?
I don't think so. I'm just dreaming of a day when you have the mice can be handled by the robots. But that's a tall order. That would be amazing, though.
I actually dream of a world where we might predict a lot of that on the computer digitally, and we won't have to use the mice. I mean, that would be ideal, right? Where you can, of course, we're very far from that. Literally, we still cannot predict what will happen on a petri dish. But, even nowadays, let alone a mouse, right? It's very hard to predict what will happen on a mouse based on empirical evidence of what happens in vitro. Um, so we're really, really far, but it would be amazing if in the future um, we can have something like a digital cell or a digital organism, um, where we can predict how a particular drug or something like that will interact with a specific sort of digital entity. And then, in the future, we could perhaps have digital entities for individual people, in which case it would take you towards a future of personalized medicine, where you can try to predict how a particular drug will um, affect a particular patient, how effective it might be or might not be. And, why not dream? Like I mentioned, we're really, really far from that. But um, I feel like, oftentimes the role of the scientist is to approximate what seems like science fiction today into into science in the future, right? Remove the fiction side of things. And if you think of the greatest breakthroughs in medicine and in science, um, the first time that they were proposed, they probably seemed like science fiction to most people, right? And yet now we get to reap the benefits of all of those advances and all of those scientific discoveries.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, yes, it seems like a very far-fetched idea or far off idea to have things entirely digitalized and entirely done without live models or without cells or anything in a dish. But if you think about the discoveries we're making using genomics and genomic sequencing alone right now, we are already seeing reduction in animal models and where you can ask the first steps of a question. You can get a little further just with data, and then you start to bring things into animals. So I think step by step we are going to get there. Cesar, anything that we didn't ask you, anything you want to kind of end on, thoughts, messages for our audience? You've given them lots of little tidbits around mentorship or mentorship tidbits, both in terms of AI and otherwise. But anything else you want to share?
No, I would just say that it's really an exciting time to be a scientist, and yeah, so I think there's a lot to discover in biology. I would say it is the new frontier. And so anyone thinking of devoting their life to biology and biological problems, I think it's going to be an incredibly interesting future, particularly at this intersection with AI.
I agree. We keep hearing we can't keep up with AI. Like the servers are using all of the water, and like there's too much data. There's not going to be enough computing power. There's not like we need to build data centers immediately. And I'm just wondering if the message is we can do so much with AI. Can our resources keep up? Is there going to be
Yeah, it's a great question. I think I'm also extremely concerned by that because both electrically in terms of energy consumption, GPUs required a lot. The cooling systems that are required. So it's something to think about as a society, right? Do we want to continue investing in all of these huge data centers, or do we want to be a bit more conscious about climate? I don't know. I tend to think that I love planet Earth, so I would prefer to have planet Earth exist for a lot longer. And so, in order to do that, maybe we need to make some hard decisions. Um, One thing that worries me is that the genie is out of the bottle. A, a lot of the institutions driving AI research forward are for-profit companies, right? And so I think it is already really hard. It will be really hard to stop the race, the AI race. I don't know. I think we need to have hard discussions as a society, including some of the big companies, including governments, including the public at large, academia, to actually answer some of those questions, right? Like, what kind of world do we want to live in, and we want to have for our kids? What kind of world do we want to see in the next decades, right?
I'm tempted to say, let's ask AI how to solve the problem of its own energy consumption, but
And every time we use ChatGPT, right, like we're actually using, we're
yeah,
we're part of the problem in a way, right?
yeah.
So how do we use it in a way that is like responsible? Yeah,
Yeah, it switches. We haven't been able to do it very well with the other areas of society that are overconsumptive. Plastic and carbon in general, and so I worry about that. And I agree with you that I don't think that we can stop this runaway train at this point. I think there's too much money to be made and too much efficiencies to be gained and discoveries to be made.
yeah,
And so I think that rather than asking people to slow down. I think you're going to get a handful of society that'll do that, the same as the small handful of society who makes very conscious decisions in their life. But ultimately, the answer has to be that we figure out the energy consumption and, cooling and all of those things. We have to figure out alternative ways to do this because I don't think there's any other option. So,
yeah, yeah, exactly. So let's see what happens. But I think we are at a critical stage with that. I mean, there are more and more data centers being built everywhere, and um, it is, it's all about incentives, right? But if the incentive structure is to make money, then you know that takes us into a race that it's not going to stop as long as money is being made. So yeah, let's see what happens.
Thank you very much for joining us, Cesar. Thank you, Jason. Have a great rest of your week. And yeah, it was great to have this fascinating discussion.
You too. Thanks for having me.
That brings us to the end of our show. Don't forget to sign up for our email list at www.labcoatsandlifepodcast.com to get show notes, episode summaries, and links to useful information, or learn more about STEM mentorship via the resources found at www.stemcell.com/labcoatsandlife. You can also reach out to us on X via STEMCELL, so at STEMCELL Tech, or via email at info@labcoatsandlifepodcast.com with feedback or to suggest guests.